Brent here from American English with this guy. It's been a little while since I've posted anything on this channel, but I'm at school right now. Maybe you can tell. And I just recorded a lesson for my own students, but I figured I would make it available here on this channel. It's about a very famous American author. Her name is Maya Angelou, and we go over I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. We've been studying her for this past week. So I talk about a video that we've seen. I can actually leave the link in the description if you also want to watch that video. But I think I speak pretty clearly, pretty slowly, maybe a little bit more quickly, maybe like 2 times as quickly as I would maybe on this channel. But you can hear how I speak to my native English students, and it might not be all that different from how I normally present myself to non-native English students. So hopefully the listening is good for you. Hopefully you can increase your English listening comprehension with this lesson. So hope you like it. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, because I could answer them. I've been studying this for about a week or so. All right, enjoy. Hey, we're here again. Hope everything's working with the internet and everything. Not all of us are actually in the building today because, more quarantining, more sickness. So if you're at home, at least you can see what we're doing here in class today. So the last couple days I had been wrestling. Should we read that excerpt of I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings? Because really hard. We would have to go through a lot of vocabulary, I think, just to read the page or two. So at some point, maybe later in your life, if you want to read this book, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, it might be a good thing. But what we're going to do today is we are going to read a summary of the book. So by the end of today's lesson, you will have a pretty good idea of what the entire book is about. And it's going to probably take us 15 minutes to get through the whole book. I don't encourage you to do this, but there is a website called Spark Notes where they give you an entire summary of the book in a very short period of time, like right there. Now, there are a lot of ads you have to watch, but I mean, not watch, but look at, they're all over the place, but it's free. And you can even go into like different characters. You can go more of a summary. This is how I learned how to read Shakespeare. So there is benefit when you have to read like a classic. If you're ever in English class, if you get to college, even if you aren't majoring in English, you might have to read a couple of the classics. You can look at the Spark Notes. Don't use it as your only source, but you can read through the summary and you'll have a good idea of what the book is about. Now, you probably want to actually read the book for the detail, but here we have a summary, a pretty good summary. We'll learn some things that we didn't know in the video. So, I mean, by the end of today's lesson, you should be a pretty good expert on I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings without actually reading it. So let's get started. Even this, though, has a few tricky words we'll talk about. This is not exactly easy reading either. Remember, this was published in 1969, and we found out that Maya Angelou lived until 2014, right? Which is why she published, I think it was 8 autobiographies. This one is about her very early life. Lots of racism today. We're going to talk about exactly how bad it could get if you were Black living in the South, the American South in the 1930s. So not a fun topic, but again, one that we should just remember, like this took place. Another thing before we get started, hang on. There you go. 1930s, U.S. If you remember, slavery ended. Does anybody know? Because I think you're studying this in history right now. Maybe I'll pause the video. Slavery ended in this country 1865. So, and that had been around for hundreds of years, right? 1865. I think almost like not 300 years, but like 200 years, 1865. So we're talking only about 70 years later. So you can imagine it's not like slavery stopped all at once. Abraham Lincoln wrote the Emancipation Proclamation, very big words, but it just basically said, hey, slaves are free. Do you think all the slave owners, oh, okay. No, even the Civil War was fought, but there was still fighting. And it's not like you're a slave living on a plantation, let's say, and then you're like free. You don't have a job. You don't have money. The only place you've had to live was on the plantation, somebody who owned you. So it was a long process. Some still argue, there's not slavery today, but it's just, not equal yet. So this is very early. Like, you can imagine maybe Maya Angelou's grandmother or grandfather could have literally been slaves. They would have been young slaves, but if they were babies, and we're talking 70 years later. So it's still a new thing. One thing that when we read this, it sounds like a lot of the people around her were actually sharecroppers, which is slightly better than slaves. So sharecroppers, of course, had the freedom to move elsewhere, but they probably didn't have the means. They didn't have the money. They didn't have the transportation. Had to worry about racist laws that were against them. Okay. So even though slavery was not around in Maya Angelou's time, rampant racism was, which we will see here. All right, how do I do this? Share. Full book summary right here. In I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings, Maya Angelou describes her coming of age as a precocious but insecure Black girl in the American South during the 1930s and subsequently in California during the 1940s. So if somebody is precocious, they're young, full of energy, you can imagine like a little 2-3-year-old, very curious, getting into things, innocent. And that's going to change. Maya's innocence, as we know, is going to be dashed pretty early on, unfortunately. Maya's parents divorced when she was only 3 years old and shipped Maya and her older brother Bailey, who, as I was reading this, I really like Bailey. I think he's a good guy, to live with their paternal grandmother, Annie Henderson, in rural Stamps. So I just want to make sure that you know paternal, it means on the father's side. So if it was a maternal grandmother, it would be her mom's mother. But this is a paternal grandmother, so it's her father's mother. Hey, back to the story. Where were we? Arkansas. See my cursor there. Arkansas, Stamps, Arkansas. Annie, whom they call Mama, so her grandmother, but they called her Mama, runs the only store in the Black section of Stamps and becomes the central moral figure in Maya's childhood. So the central moral figure, teaching her what's right, what's wrong. As young children, Maya and Bailey struggle with the pain of having been rejected and abandoned by their parents. Maya also finds herself tormented by the belief that she is an ugly child who will never measure up to the genteel white girls. Genteel, it's another word that might be new. It's just polite and respectful. And that's exactly what, if we talk about segregation, what she was dealing with, separating the races, that's exactly what society wanted from young Black people, old Black people, is not to feel as equal as white people. That's what it was designed to do, make them feel inferior. And it looks like it's working for Maya, because we'll see that she can still see how other people live, how the other white people in Stamps will live. And obviously she's not able to live in that way. Yet she will be but it's a pretty rough childhood. Right here, I'll just highlight this in blue in case you've lost your place. Try to hide that ad so it's not distracting. She does not feel equal to other Black children. So she even feels below other Black children, and that's, common, I think, for young children to feel insecure. It's tough. One Easter Sunday, Maya is unable to finish reciting a poem in church and self-consciously feeling ridiculed and a failure. So she puts a lot of pressure on herself. Maya races from church crying, laughing, and wetting herself. Bailey sticks up for Maya when people actually make fun of her to her face, wielding his charisma to put others in their place. So it seems like her brother has a lot of confidence. I'm glad that she had him there, and he takes care of her. And we'll see, you might remember from the video we watched, he's actually going to be her voice after. And I probably won't read this out loud. You might be able to. It is a little graphic. I will summarize it, but it is that incident where she was sexually abused at a very young age, at age 7. I think anytime anyone is sexually abused, it's going to be traumatic, absolutely traumatic. But when she is, I think the video said 7, didn't it? And this says 8 here. Either way, very young, just absolutely devastating. Just remember where she is able to go after this, despite all of the setbacks in her childhood. It's just remarkable. Growing up in Stamps, Maya faces a deep-seated Southern racism manifested in wearying daily indignities and terrifying lynch mobs. So those indignities, I did mention in a couple classes what that might look like. An example. Well, first of all, if you were Black, you probably went to a school that was not nearly as good as the white schools. All of the money from the taxes, they went to the white schools. So it would make people who attended the Black schools feel inferior. There were also things where if you were walking down the street, a white person and a Black person were walking down the street, it was custom. Like, you were going to have to do this. If you were Black, step off the sidewalk and let the other person pass. If you're wearing a hat, you might tip your hat to be respectful. It's the worst. It's the worst. So there's no way that you could feel very good about that if you were Black. That's what it was designed to do. Segregation. Just a couple examples. Lynch mob, by the way, a lynch mob. So she worried about lynch mobs in the 1930s. And that is where a group of white people would single out a Black person and actually hang them from a tree. Lynch mob. So living in fear, being put down all the time, very difficult childhood. And it gets worse. The next part here. She spends time at Mama's store observing the cotton pickers as they journey to and from work in the fields. So those were the sharecroppers I was talking about, where pretty much still don't have the freedom because of money, transportation, all that stuff, that they're probably doing very similar jobs to what their parents were doing when they were slaves. When Maya's 8, her father, of whom she has no memory, arrives in Stamps unexpectedly and takes her and Bailey to live with their mother, Vivian, in St. Louis, Missouri. So out of the blue, this man arrives. They tell her that this is your father, but she has no memory of him. Beautiful and alluring, Vivian lives a wild life, working in gambling parlors. Now, this is the part that I'm actually not going to read. You can read that for yourself if you want. We've heard definitely enough about it. I don't want it to, trigger anybody, but she does have an experience where she is abused at age, I think it says 8 here. I think the movie said 7. So devastating. And this is where she becomes mute, right, for 5 years. We'll learn how she moves on from that. In the aftermath of these events, Maya endures the guilt and shame of having been sexually abused. She also believes that she bears the responsibility of Mr. Friedman's death because this was not in the video. She denied in court that he had molested her prior to the rape. So she actually, who knows? You're like 7 or 8 and you're in court and everybody is watching you, and she denies that this happened. It's got to be tough. A lot of times, children that young will not have to testify in court, but, who's to blame her? Very traumatic experience. And I'll highlight this just in case you've lost your place so you can read along. Believing that she has become a mouthpiece for the devil, Maya stopped speaking to everyone except Bailey. So her older brother, she still speaks to, but that was not in the videos. That's new for us today. Her mother's family accepts her silence at first as temporary post-rape trauma, but later they become frustrated and angry when they perceive to be disrespectful at what they perceive to be disrespectful behavior. So at first they accept it, for a little while, and then they're like, "Oh, you're just being disrespectful to us." So she has even more pressure on her. To Maya's relief, but Bailey's regret, Maya and Bailey return to Stamps to live with Mama. So they're being shuffled back and forth. This is the 4th major move they've had. California to Arkansas to Missouri, back to Arkansas. It's got to be pretty rough. Mama manages to break through Maya's silence by introducing her to Miss Bertha Flowers, a kind, educated woman who tells Maya to read works of literature out loud, giving her books of poetry to help her regain her voice. This could be pretty influential, seeing that she will later go on to write some pretty amazing poetry. We know that she will speak at President Clinton's 1993 inauguration. This is obviously not in I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, because it was published in 1969, so about 30 years earlier. During these years in Stamps, Maya becomes aware of both the fragility, so if something's fragile, it's easily broken, and the strength of her community. She attends a church revival during which a priest preaches implicitly against white hypocrisy through his sermon on charity. So the church is trying to tell the people that, hey, white hypocrisy. If somebody is a hypocrite, it means they don't do what they say they're going to do. For instance, if someone is a hypocrite, they, as an adult, might tell kids, hey, you shouldn't smoke, but they actually smoke themselves. That would be a hypocrite. The spiritual strength gained during the sermon soon dissipates as the revival crowd walks home past a honky-tonk party. So I think this was a party probably by white people, maybe some country western music back then playing. This is probably the 1940s. Maya also observes the entire community listening to the Joe Louis heavyweight championship boxing match, desperately longing for him to defend his title against his white opponent. All right, I want to really quickly talk about this guy, Joe Louis, but actually I'm going to talk about somebody else instead. So I just have to share a different screen. So if you were black during this time, you didn't have a lot of idols to look up to who were also black. In fact, very few, if any, because like in sports, if there, baseball was really popular at this time, but there was a league if you were white and there was a league if you were black. So the races were separated. There was one sport though that was not, and it had been, I guess you would call it integrated for about 50 years, and that is boxing. So let me try to share. I can't talk and want to talk. I can't talk and share the screen at the same time. This boxer named Jack Johnson, really quickly, if you can see the years here. Now, he was born in 1878 and unfortunately died in a car accident in 1946. But I mean, racism was strong at this time. Jim Crow era, If you ever hear that, that was another way to say like segregation, but Jim Crow laws were exactly made to have blacks and whites separated. Lots of discrimination, different water fountains, the most common way people hear about it, but it was much deeper than that. But this guy, is this even sharing? Okay, so you can see it. But this guy started competing in boxing against white people, against other white boxers. And so that could be an idol of yours. It was one of the few places in which black people and white people could compete on equal footing. So a lot of people in her community, now I got to share the other screen, but Jack Johnson, Joe Louis, a couple very early. Jack Johnson's way before Joe Louis, but and in Detroit there is like the Joe Louis Arena named after him. But it was one of the few places where blacks and whites could compete. And so if you were black, you're probably like, oh, come on, let's go. You're rooting for that guy, right? Because it's about the only place in your life where you could be equal or even better than someone who is white. Let me see. This should be easier to do, but it's really not. So I'll share the other way so we can finish reading this. Hope you're enjoying this. Hope you're not sleeping. I find this to be fascinating. You may hate it, but so lots of bad things here so far. And we get the last line of this is actually a little more positive, but that's about it. So lots of hardship for Maya here. All right. Maya endures several appalling incidents to teach her about the insidious nature of racism. So this is how bad racism could get. It could get actually a little worse. But at age 10, Maya takes a job for a white woman who calls Maya Mary for her own convenience. So she probably knows her name is Mary, but to make her feel, less human, like I'm not even going to call you your right name, right? Very disrespectful. Maya becomes enraged and retaliates by breaking the woman's fine china. So even at like a young age, you don't mess with Maya Angelou. At Maya's 8th grade graduation, a white speaker devastates the proud community by explaining that black students are expected to become only athletes and servants. So can you imagine that at your 8th grade graduation? Like, yeah, you basically can only do two things in life, and that's like pretty much serve white people or maybe become an athlete, but that's it. That's it. So why are you even going to school? Devastating. This is horrible right here. I mean, people hate going to the dentist enough, right? Look at this. When Maya gets a rotten tooth, Mama takes her to the only dentist and stamps, a white man who insults her, saying he'd rather place his hand in a dog's mouth than hers. So this is the type of stuff that if you were black, you were dealing with every single day, made to make you feel less human. The last straw comes when Bailey encounters a dead, rotting black man and witnesses a white man's satisfaction at seeing the body. So bad stuff, racism, really, really bad stuff. Mama begins to fear for the children's well-being and saves money to bring them to Vivian, who now lives in California. When Maya is 13, the family moves to live with Vivian in Los Angeles and then Oakland, California. And that's a big move too. If you're not familiar with the map of California, but Los Angeles is in the southern part of California. Oakland is near San Francisco. It's about like a 5-6 hour drive. So another, like a lot of moving for her as a child, big moves. When Vivian marries Daddy Slidell, a positive father figure, that was the older man they were talking about. They move with him to San Francisco, the first city where Maya feels at home. She spends one summer with her father, Big Bailey, in Los Angeles, and has to put up with his cruel indifference and his hostile girlfriend. This was not in the video either, but this makes a really big mark on her life. Dolores, after Dolores cuts her in a fight. So that's, you might hear of like, stepmothers and children not getting along. This like it literally got physical. Maya runs away and lives for a month with a group of homeless teenagers in a junkyard. That is not in the movie either. Her living in the video we watched, her living in a junkyard. That's not in there. Maya runs away and lives for a month. Where I read that. All right, last part here. She returns to San Francisco strong and self-assured. She defies racist hiring policies in wartime San Francisco to become the first Black streetcar conductor at age 15. Really quickly about this wartime, okay? We're talking World War II. This actually, World War II, I don't know if you know this, but it actually did help minorities. And when I talk about people who weren't white men, I guess, right? Even women were helped by this. World War II, it required a lot of, at first, it was white men to go and fight. Certainly some black men as well. I believe in still World War II, I think, I could be wrong. They were also segregated, I believe, World War II. But since so many men were going to fight, jobs back home, they needed to be replaced. And so this is where women and minorities were able to get a little bit of a foot up. They were able to get some jobs that were off limits to them before. And then this is when after the war, when white men come back, all these jobs are kind of taken away from the people who had them. And that is the very beginnings of more equality for other people besides white men. Just a little tidbit there. So that's probably one reason why she was able to get that job as the streetcar conductor at 15. It's because people were desperate for workers. But the fact that she got that was pretty amazing. And I think I told you I'd read somewhere else where she just basically, she's living near her mom at this time. And her mom was like, hey, don't give up. Just keep going. Just go every day until they give you a job. Eventually they did. All right, let's get this bigger here. Almost done. Almost done. We know this from the video, I believe. At 16, she hides her pregnancy from her mother and stepfather for 8 months, graduates from high school. I think this is the only positive sentence of the whole summary of the book. The account ends as Maya begins to feel confident as a mother to her newborn son. So most of the time, I would not recommend this. If you're feeling like you don't have a lot of self-confidence, have a child, no. I mean, that's usually just so much pressure, so much stress, so much time. But Maya was able to, you could see at 16 getting pregnant, not ideal. It changes your life quite a bit. But at least she graduated high school, and then having that baby made her feel more confident. All right, so that's without reading, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. It's almost like you read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, kind of. You could probably have a conversation with someone. They're like, oh yeah, what do you think of I Know How the Caged Bird Sings? Like, I liked it. That's parts of the story that were pretty moving. Now, I encourage you at some point, read the story. It's very hard reading, but in high school or college, if you ever want to go back and revisit it. But right now, in the 8th grade, you got some knowledge of what Maya Angelou's I Know What the Caged Bird Sings is about. All right. Thanks for watching. I guess you had to, right? All right. I think we'll read Cryers Cross now. Okay. See ya.